Hello students, welcome to today's class. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic related to the Neolithic ages. As we have studied in some of the previous lectures, that Neolithic ages are one of the most important ages or eras in the Stone Ages, and this was the time period when the earliest beginning of farming, domestication of plants and the domestication of animals took place. In today's lecture, I will be talking about the effects of the beginning of these new trends, and especially my focus would be farming on the early social beings. There are certain objectives of today's lecture. You will be able to understand the beginnings of early village life. You will be able to evaluate the life of the early farmers, to highlight some of the complexities in their social structure, to look into the changing social order and the growing disparities, and lastly to understand the development of the beliefs and the ritual systems during the Neolithic era. One of the most important developments in the history of humans was the successful transition from a hunting and gathering economy based on nomadic lifestyle to an agricultural economy based on a sedentary lifestyle. Since the dawn of humanity up until about 10,000 BCE, humans had relied mostly on foraging, hunting, collecting and fishing as their primary means of food production. Humans have used various agriculture-based subsistence economies since the late Mesolithic period. Throughout Central and West Asia, domestication of animals gradually supplanted traditional subsistence practices like hunting and gathering. If viewed in this light, the development and spread of agriculture appear to have occurred quite quickly. However, domestication occurred across widely diverse time frames during the previous 10,000 years, depending on the factors such as economic and social structure and the local environment. Over the past few decades, scholars have become increasingly interested in the history and spread of the agricultural practices throughout the world. Much of this investigation has focused on how the onset of agriculture altered the social structures in different parts of the world. Animal and plant domestication caused a social revolution, and people first settled down in communities or villages when they began spending extended periods of time in the same location. Issues of hierarchy and conflict arose in this new society, as did the issues of kinship and resource distribution. Because of these issues, new social systems with more central authority emerged. Agriculture took center stage and affected society in a variety of ways, making this societal reorganization possible. Now let us talk about the beginning of the earliest village lives. Agricultural practices and the domestication of animals like the dog, goat and pig directly led to the emergence of the world's early communities and the village cultures. Archaeological sites in Anatolia and Jericho have yielded the remains of vegetation and animals. As far back as the Paleolithic era, humans have been moving about in response to the seasonal migration of the animals. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of small Mesolithic communities that once inhabited areas rich in marine resources. Although the pattern of settlement did change over time, the discovery of houses at the Yangshao cultural sites in China is evidence of the advanced settlements. We know that agriculture is labor intensive and requires a sedentary lifestyle in contrast to the hunting and the gathering, which compelled people to migrate from one area to another area in order to clear fields, plough it, spread the seeds, water the plants and protect the seedlings from birds and animals. It took another 5 to 6 months then before the people could begin the harvesting, and this suggests that farming, in contrast to previous occupations, prompted people to establish the permanent settlements at one place. Humans who decided to settle down in one area naturally began to construct their homes, barns and even stables for themselves and their livestock. Wattle and daub construction with occasional stone debris was used to build the first of these settlements. When compared to the primitive huts and caves that people once lived in during the old Stone Ages, now these new structures were far more sturdy. The concentration of so many of these dwellings in one region led to the development of the earliest villages. Most early village communities were quite small. These have been uncovered by archaeologists in a number of different parts of West Asia and even Europe. At Çatalhöyük, one of the earliest village settlements which is located in Turkey, archaeologists found evidence of small settlements in the form of villages which they believe were inhabited by groups of people during the Neolithic times. Gordon Childe, one of the very important archaeologists, claims that it was in these early settlements that people began farming and even domesticating the animals. Now we will be talking about the life of these early farmers. Food production and hunting and gathering are not the opposite ends of a linear evolutionary spectrum. The hunting and gathering lifestyle did not completely disappear even after the introduction of food production based on animal and plant domestication. Even in the modern era, these activities are still practiced by many tribes around the world which are documented by the anthropologists. Furthermore, most of the earliest farming sites have been found to have also been used for hunting and or gathering. There is evidence to support the idea that early farmers and hunter-gatherers had social and economic ties. Village populations in the Neolithic period were often self-sufficient in terms of food production and the population size. However, the quantity of food provided is not the only problem. Food is not necessary for human survival only, but also has many other important functions. For example, food is often an integral aspect of the social systems, including those of hospitality, gift giving, trade and other social taboos. Both inside the family and in the greater community, discussions about food and how it is prepared are central to daily life. Assumptions regarding the social and political structure of early food producing groups might be made, but it is important to keep in mind that these communities were not homogeneous at all. When it comes to social organization, smaller communities and places reflect simpler forms, whereas larger ones show more complex societies. Depending on the resource capacity of the environmental niche they lived in and their techniques of adaptation, the community's specific subsistence patterns would have also differed. Tools, pottery and housing construction variations all point to distinctive cultural practices and epochs. Different belief systems and customs are reflected in the variety of burial methods and artifacts that may have some cultic importance. Some people believe that farming was much easier than the lifestyle of ancient hunter-gatherers who had to work hard to make a living and had little time for leisure activities. Equally simplistic is the idea that early farmers enjoyed a carefree existence. Generally speaking, farmers were an especially defenseless group. Lack of rain can result in a poor harvest, pests and diseases can destroy an entire crop, and mold and rats can eat through stored grain just as they do today. Despite the disparities in the early farmers' lifestyles and the need to reject stereotypes, there are some overarching characteristics of the impact of the shift from hunting and gathering to the food production techniques that can be noted. Some nomadic hunting and gathering communities have adopted some of the characteristics of settled communities, while others continue to practice features of nomadic farming or herding. Additionally, opinions vary as to whether or not sedentary lifestyles emerged before or after the advent of agriculture. However, it cannot be denied that in the long run, most villages became more settled after the shift to agriculture. Human skeletal data from studies on diet and disease suggests that foragers ate a high protein diet that was more diverse, balanced and nutritious than the diet of early farmers, who ate a lot of starchy foods like grains and roots. Similarly, plagues and infectious diseases were more likely to affect settled populations than those which were nomadic. This may be the reason why some prehistoric farming cultures had such a high mortality rate from the sickness. If people had stayed in one place for longer, they would have developed deeper roots and a more permanent link with their ecological niche. A sedentary lifestyle and the nutrition common in agricultural societies would have reduced the burden on the expectant mothers and helped ensure a more secure postpartum period. Inevitably, this confluence of causes would have led to greater numbers of births. Children and the elderly would have benefited greatly from sedentary lifestyles, and society as a whole would have seen lower mortality rates and even longer life expectancies as a result of this. An increase in the population and a shift in the average age of a given community would have resulted from the introduction of food production for such reasons. New sets of tools and equipment were essential for the food production. It also necessitated rearranging the roles of men, women and children as well as the contributions of the elderly. Additionally, the food ethic would have shifted, as most hunter-gatherer societies only gather as much food as their members can eat in a short period of time. It is likely that farmers had to produce and stockpile large amounts of food for the later consumption. Instead, than worrying about finding food each day to eat, people would have been more concerned with more long-term solutions. Some researchers believe that women may have been the first to try new things when it came to the domestication of plants. This theory relies heavily on the anthropological research linking women and gardening. If in communities based on hunting and gathering, men typically did the hunting and women did the food collecting, then it is quite likely that women conducted the earliest experiments of agriculture. And since women are typically responsible for food storage and preparation, it is possible that females played a crucial part in the development of the technical aspects related to the pottery making also. Researchers have found that the process of creating a pot takes a long time and involves more than just the potter's hands. Women and children may have helped them with the other steps in the pottery making process, such as gathering clay, sorting it, preparing it for firing, and decorating the finished products. While there is no such thing as clear anthropological data, there is considerable reason to believe that women played a significant role in the transition to the food production. Evidence of specialized crafts and long-distance trade and commerce has been discovered at some Neolithic sites, despite the period's common association with the subsistence level of activity. There is evidence from a number of places that various parts of the settlement were designated for particular functions, for example, cattle rearing, craft production, butchering, etc. This reflects deliberate community-wide choices about how to best utilize space and plan for the events. Some Neolithic groups were communicating with early urban societies also. Larger groups of people moving into permanent communities would have required the development of novel social norms and behaviors distant from those of the nomadic bands of hunters and gatherers. There must have been age and gender-based social stratifications among the early farming and herding communities. Size disparities in dwellings and burial items of varying quantities and quality have been interpreted as evidence of social stratification at various sites. Larger populations would have needed strong governmental authority and organization to implement policies governing their economy and the social interactions. Now let us talk about the complexities that were prevalent in the social structure of these ancient communities. Agriculture ushered in the era of permanent settlement, which in turn gave rise to class distinctions based on one's line of work. The sorcerer shaman was the sole specialist in the Paleolithic and the Mesolithic societies, while everyone else engaged in the subsistence pursuits including hunting, gathering, fishing, and tool making. The Neolithic period saw the rise of permanent villages, and with them came a wide variety of professions, including those of the chief, the priest, a farmer, a potter, a fighter, breeder, herder, stonesman, carpenter, weaver, smith, etc. After the Neolithic ages, humans began to specialize even more, working as wheelwrights, traders, and even metallurgists, among other professions. Craft and vocational specialization followed the spread of settled life. North African settlements of Meremde and Fayum became important pottery hubs, for example. In contrast to the Paleolithic and Mesolithic societies, which lacked any clear social stratification, the Neolithic societies saw the emergence of a highly nuanced, complex form. Now, the post of chief or tribal leader became hereditary during this time, and the individual who inherited it would become the most powerful member of his tribe with influence over the military and the beliefs of his people. As we have seen, a new social class who were known as the priests formed as well, whose members held not only religious but also political, economic and social sway. During the Paleolithic and the Mesolithic eras in Africa, ethnographic evidence shows that the booty was dispersed without favoritism. The shift to an agricultural economy, however, weakened such communal bonds in which people began viewing land as a valuable commodity and vying for control of it. Indeed, the concept of private and communal property existed even in the prehistoric times in the form of the marking of hunting territory, for example, However, it became more strict with the domestication of plants and animals as competition arose over the ownership of fields, tools, and even animals. The idea of private property, which stems from the idea that individuals should be able to exercise some measure of control over shared resources, prepared the way for crimes like theft and pillage, which were particularly common around harvest seasons. One possible explanation for the fortification of Neolithic village settlements is the emergence of inter-village or inter-tribal conflicts. Defense walls were also discovered in early Mesoamerica, China, and the Egyptian sites in addition to the ancient city of Jericho, where they encircle the densely packed homes. Now let us talk about the changing social order. The advent of farming brought forth a whole new set of social issues. Disputes between tribes often erupted over the competition for scarce resources. The construction of long-lasting shelters and forts necessitated the allocation of more manpower. Agricultural communities have developed a special group of warriors to ensure the safety of their towns and the agricultural endeavors because of the enormous amount of labor required in crop production, whose job was to keep outsiders out of their territory. This strategy was used more effectively by farming communities to defend their homes and fields than by the hunting and gathering groups. According to anthropological research, during conflicts between non-farming communities, the losers typically gave up their homes and moved elsewhere. However, farming groups used to stay in their villages because they paid war compensation to the victorious side, or victorious tribes gave them subordinate status. Consequently, the development of agriculture altered the significance of warfare. The emergence of agriculture gave rise to private property, which generated disparities in society. Evidence of social stratification can be seen in the grave goods of the wealthy buried at Abu Huraira and Çatalhöyük in the West Asian territories. Now let us talk about the birth of new ritual systems and religious beliefs which were practiced by the Neolithic societies. During the Neolithic era, a new religious system emerged in response to the societal changes brought about by the advent of farming. Religion, the second institution to arise after the family, also underwent growth into a more sophisticated form throughout this time period. Religion is everywhere an expression in one form or another of a sense of dependence on a power outside ourselves. Writer Bernays defining the religion that in his view took concrete form in the Neolithic times. Modern anthropologists have noted that ancient religion was more concerned with ritual than with doctrine. Myths, dogma, and theologies, on the other hand, generally followed the ceremonies. We all know that ancient people relied solely on the whims of Mother Nature, such as the changing of the seasons, the rain, the maturation and reproduction of animals and plants, and so on. They thought that sacrifices were the only way to bring about these changes. Because of this, rituals and ceremonies were done. To simulate raindrops, water was often set ablaze and sprinkled over the maize during these ceremonies. Everyone in the village would dress in animal skins and act out their daily routines like the animals on which they relied for sustenance. It seems they reasoned that by mirroring the habits of these creatures, they would ensure their own survival. It was only after people had organized themselves under the leadership of priestess that they began to practice the tenets of religion and carry out the religious rites. The establishment of such a group can be deduced from the location designated for the religious worship. The megalithic monuments and stone implements which were discovered at Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, for instance, have been regarded by scholars as representing these ritual centers. The lack of water source and other necessities for human settlement at this location strongly suggests that it was instead a sacred site used only for the ritual systems. Another Neolithic site in modern Turkey, Çatalhöyük, contained structures that clearly showed they had been utilized for religious and ritual purposes. Certain rituals were conducted for the express purpose of boosting fertility and reproduction. Relying on the capacity for plant and animal and human reproduction has gained increased importance as the connection between farming methods and seasons has become clear. For the most part, the fertility cult's emphasis on the importance of both sexes led to the worship of both men and women as supernatural powers. Indicators of a complex religious structure and symbolism during this time period include large-scale plaster reliefs, representations and paintings of bull heads from the walls, and intricate frescoes in the buildings discovered at the Neolithic settlement in Turkey. Evidence of human skeletal remains and grave items suggested that these people had a strong belief in a life after death. Early grave goods were simple and few in quantity, but as production rose, both grave size and good size grew, suggesting that grave size had come to stand as a metaphor for the display of power, status, and even social standing. In most Neolithic sites in West Asia, archaeologists have found graves that point to both communal and individual burial practices. Relics of plaster figures fashioned after the dead have been discovered at numerous sites in Israel and Jordan, suggesting the practice of ancestor worship was common among the first agricultural societies. So with this, we have come to the end of today's lecture. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you so much.